The Adeptus Astartes epitomize the greatest virtues found within the heat of battle. Bravery, honor, and self-sacrifice can be found throughout every battle ever waged by humanity. Yet there are some who uphold these noble qualities as their champion virtues. For today, we shall elucidate the many chapters of the Space Marines derived from the lineage of the defiant Kargan of Chogoris, Jaghatai Khan. The successor chapters of the 5th Legion, the White Scars.
If you can see us, we are dangerous indeed. But that is as nothing to the peril you face if you cannot see us. And all you can hear is our laughter. The Legiones Astartes are varied in their applications of strategy, martial prowess, and doctrines. Though all proficient in the arts of combat, they are disparate and unknowable to one another. For while many Astartes flaunt their skill at arms, not all are respected or understood in their methods of waging war. For today, we shall elucidate the most misunderstood and mysterious of all the legions. The 5th Legion of the Adeptus Astartes, the White Scars. The 5th Legion would have one of the most obscured and overlooked histories of any of the Legiones Astartes. Formed during the Wars of Unification by the Emperor of Mankind, alike to all the founding legions, the 5th would be tasked with a special role in mind. Drawn from the technomadic tribesmen of the Fulian Basin, the 5th would initially only number in the hundreds. Braving the harshest environments of terror, the 5th would rove the wasted landscapes of a planet divided, in their task to root out the many warlords and upstart empires that would defy the Emperor. Striking without warning and at great speed, the 5th would annihilate the easy prey before them. To better reunify the disparate factions of humanity, the Emperor would need a force capable of pathfinding the many worlds and strongholds of the fragments of humanity. To this end, the 5th Legion, then known as the Star Hunters, would chart the unknown territories of the galaxy and relay information to the newly forged Imperium. Organized into small, mobile battalions, the 5th Legion would charge into battle and wreak havoc before falling back to allow larger legions, such as the 1st, to be the hammer blow against their disorganized and crippled adversaries. A lightning strike across the stars, the Star Hunters would probe their enemies' defenses for weaknesses before landing their killing blow. An efficient and yet elusive legion, their need to constantly be on the move and distance themselves from their brother legions would shroud the 5th into an unpredictable and mysterious force. Resolving to never ask for aid, the 5th Legion would assume their duties with unwavering discipline, not waging their wars for pride, but rather duty. Their deeds would be forgotten by the wider Imperium and its scholars, for it was the nature of the Star Hunters to be reclusive. For over a Terran century, the 5th Legion would continue their arduous and lonely crusade, separating and fragmenting further as the need for pathfinders continued to grow. Each day seen by the Legion as a victory to their cause, the 5th would never relent in their continued push to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. Yet soon, the slowly diminishing Legion would be renewed with the discovery of their long-lost Primarch, Jaghatai Khan. Upon the world of Mundus Planus, the Emperor of Mankind, alongside his most favored son, Horus Lupercal, would discover the feudal world that would later be known as Chogoris. The vast plains of the world would harbor a man once known as Katugu Suogu, now titled as the Kargan, or Khan of Khans. His former name lost to history, the man who would now be known as Jaghatai had bested the world's Palatine tyrant overlord and united the tribes of Chogoris. Pledging his loyalty to the Emperor only 6 months following his conquest of his homeworld, Jaghatai would now conquer the galaxy in the name of his father, the Emperor, to enable humanity's sovereignty of the stars. Reveling the challenge of an entire galaxy of planets to bring into compliance, Jaghatai would swiftly be gifted his legions Astartes and begin the task of rebuilding its fractured ranks. Dispatching a grand summons to every company of the 5th Legion across the stars, Jaghatai would muster his forces to join at the world of Chogoris. For a decade, the disparate 5th Legion would slowly begin to answer the call of their Primarch until the dawn of the 31st millennium. The Legion had been comprised of strangers, brothers without a common legacy or heritage. Upon the empty quarter's vast plains, the Kargan would address thousands of Astartes from hundreds of worlds. 50,000 Astartes, all sharing a genetic legacy, but none unified by purpose. The Khan would declare that every one of the 5th Legion must prove their loyalty to both himself and the Legion by ritually scarring their faces. Eschewing their former names, these Astartes would adopt new names to reflect their deeds, their culture, or their devotion to the Khan. Reborn as the White Scars from then on, the 5th Legion now unified with common cause and an identity that would span every creed and culture of its Astartes, the White Scars now blooded would ascend to add their blades to the Great Crusade. The Ordu Jaghatai would begin their conquest of the stars within the Kholan Circle of Worlds. Pitting his legion against unwinnable odds for a single company, the Khan of Khans would test the might of his sons by facing the many factions of human separatists and Xenos outposts. Allowing cooperation between his sons born of hundreds of cultures, the White Scars would work together to bring their foes to heel, led in battle by their indomitable Primarch. With his legion now 80,000 Astartes strong, Jaghatai would mold his warriors into his own image. Their ferocity in battle proven and tactics tested to their limit, the White Scars would end the crusade of the Kholan Circle and bring its planet Primus, Kholan, into the fold of the 5th Legion's territories. Replenishing the losses of his legion and embarking with an army reforged in blood and fire. Standing alongside their distant cousin legions once more, the White Scars would prove to be a force adept at disciplined, swift, and deadly engagements. Mischaracterized as similar to the Eaters of Worlds or the Rout, the White Scars would, regardless of their pedigree, remain a maligned and distrusted legion. Seeking little glory for their deeds, the Scars would conduct their tasks with glee, with Primarch Sanguinius of the Blood Angels' 9th Legion remarking, "They smile often, and they laugh when they kill." Untamed by the Imperial truth, the White Scars would grant no mercy to their foes, yet prove themselves an effective legion in the eyes of the Emperor. Though detractors of the 5th Legion's strategies, such as the Primarch of the Ultramarines, Rabute Guilliman, or of their beliefs, such as Lorgar Aurelian, would make their displeasure known, the White Scars would disregard the opinions of outsiders, lacking the nuance to understand their creed. The bonds of brotherhood, few amongst the Legion, the White Scars would be accepted by only the Thousand Sons, Lunar Wolves, and Blood Angels as equals. Yet with the end of the Great Crusade drawing to a close, the White Scars would lack for the battles they preferred to wage. The wild spaces of the galaxy had dwindled, and their utility as warriors of the Emperor seemed to be nearly obsolete. Their last great battle of the Great Crusade, Ulanor, marking the peak of the Legion's glories prior to their involvement in the Great Civil War, which would rend the galaxy. For the favor of Horus Lupercal as War Master would be proven to be misplaced. With the descent of the War Master into the clutches of the ruinous powers, the Primarch of the now Sons of Horus would seek to bring his brother Primarchs into the fold of his betrayal. Though many such as Mortarion of the Death Guard and Angron of the World Eaters would be quick to turn against the Imperium, both loyalists and traitors would be uncertain as to which side the White Scars would lend their might. The Kargan had often derided the Emperor's decisions and actions, and the Legion's wild nature would seemingly be an indication of their proclivity to savagery. Jaghatai would observe the bare threads of information he had gleaned during the opening stages of the heresy. Miscommunication and treachery would be rife, and as such, the Kargan would stay his hand. With the Legion's persecution of the Orc Xenos within the Chondak system, the White Scars would receive their first insight into the actions of the War Master. Learning that the Space Wolves Legion had burned Prospero to the ground, the loyalty of the 6th Legion would be brought into question. Seeking answers to the fall of his most cherished brother and his legion, Jaghatai would journey to Prospero to find answers. Hindered by the ruin storm spawned by the Word-Bearers, the White Scars would be requested by the Imperial Fist Primarch, Rogal Dorn, to return to Holy Terra to defend the Throne World. Jaghatai's independent and resolute nature would cause him to ignore such pleas, as he would find the answers he needed alone. Ignoring the request for aid of the seemingly renegade Primarch, Leman Russ, during his engagement with the Alpha Legion, the White Scars would not join the fray until the wounds of treachery were clear to observe. Breaching the Alpha Legion blockade and journeying to Prospero, the Kargan himself and his Kashyyyk honor guard would investigate the ashes of the once proud bastion of the Thousand Suns. Meanwhile, the members of the White Scars warrior lodges would declare their allegiance to Horus with the absence of their Primarch. Controlling the flagship of the 5th Legion, Hasik Noyan Khan would attempt to usurp the Kargan's forces. Yet with the involvement of the stalwart Astartes, Shiban Khan, the White Scars loyal to the Emperor and their Primarch would oppose the White Scars traitors. Upon Prospero, Jaghatai would be separated from his Kashyyyk and find his answers in the form of an apparition of his brother, Magnus the Red. Believing the Wolves of Fenris to be dispatched by the Emperor, rather than their manipulation of the War Master, Magnus would deem the Imperium to have betrayed his legion. Explaining that only 2 paths could be chosen by the Kargan, Magnus would implore his brother to side with Horus, as he had done many times before. Despite the Khan's loyalties always being strongest between both Magnus and Horus, Jaghatai would refuse such a poisoned chalice. Acknowledging Magnus's betrayal of the Emperor, Jaghatai would destroy the apparition and, with answers found, return to his fleet. Meanwhile, the White Scars battled one another above the world of Prospero. Shiban would assault the White Scars' flagship, Swordstorm, and attempt to bring the treacherous Hasik Noyan Khan to justice. Brother fought brother, as the loyalist White Scars fought their way to the flagship's bridge. Warships of the 14th Legion, the Death Guard, began to enter the Prospero system and surround the White Scars fleet. Gemulon Noyan Khan would join the loyalist contingent in facing Hasik. The battle would even the forces of the loyalists to match the traitors. Yet for blood to be prevented from spilling further, the Legion would need their Primarch to end the division in their ranks. On Prospero, Jaghatai would be confronted by the Primarch of the Death Guard, Mortarion, whom would offer the Khan a chance to join the traitor legions. Refusing his offer, Jaghatai and his men would face the Death Guard. With the aid of the last son of Prospero, Revuel Arvida, the White Scars would best the Death Guard and return to the Swordstorm. Returning to his legion in disarray, Jaghatai would confront Hasik Noyan Khan. Paralyzing Hasik by his own hand, Jaghatai would end the treachery that had seeped into his legion. As the Death Guard began to engage the White Scars fleet, Jaghatai and the White Scars would defend themselves from the 14th Legion. With the conclusion of the battle, Jaghatai would see to the unrest within his legion. Giving his traitorous sons the chance of redemption, some would be executed for remaining loyal to the War Master. Founding the Sagya Mazan, a formation of White Scars now honor-bound to redeem their past crimes, the White Scars would banish these penitent Astartes from their ranks until their redemption had been achieved. Following the restoration of their common cause, the Kargan would lead his legion for 4 Terran Standard years in harrying and bleeding the traitor forces. Over time, the traitors would begin to adapt to the 5th Legion's tactics and blunt their efforts. Combating the Iron Warriors, Emperor's children, sons of Horus and Death Guard, for many years, the White Scars would begin to fatigue. Managing to journey to Holy Terra with the discovery of the Dark Glass artifact, and sacrifice of both their first captain, Kinjar, and Chief Stormseer, Targatai Yasugai, the Scars would endure. Aiding in the loyalist defense of the throne world during the Siege of Terra, the White Scars would prove invaluable. Complementing the Imperial Fist's doctrines of defense and fortification, the White Scars would cut down the traitors as they broke themselves against the walls of the Imperial Palace. The Legion's close ties to the Blood Angels also aiding in their synergy with the Defenders of the Throne, the White Scars would aid in reinforcing the Lionsgate spaceport and defeating the advance of the Death Guard Legion under the command of their now chaos-corrupted Primarch, Mortarion. With the War Master's defeat during the pivotal final battle between Horus Lupercal and the Emperor, the White Scars would stand as one of the few loyalist legions to stand in defense of the Imperium during its darkest hour. Securing the Ultima Segmentum with the appointment of Roboute Guilliman as Lord Commander of the now vulnerable Imperium, the 5th Legion would spend the next 70 years cleansing the galaxy of the traitor legions. Yet as they returned to their homeworld of Chogoris, they would find the Yasan sector to be overrun and pillaged by the Dark Eldar, the Drukhari. Enraged, Jaghatai Khan would wage a crusade to purge the Xenos from the Yasan sector. Chogoris had been spared much of the destruction, yet many citizens under the protection of the Kargan had been enslaved by the foul Xenos. Taking the fight to his now most hated enemy, Jaghatai would lead the 5th Legion on a path of vengeance. Reclaiming worlds of the Yasan sector, slowly, the White Scars would restore order. Informed of the introduction of the Codex Astartes throughout the Imperium, Jaghatai would willingly separate his Legion into Codex-compliant chapters. His Legion had always seen independence as a virtue, and as a result, show little resistance to the new structure of their Astartes forces. Seeing his now chapters as extensions of his son's freedom to persecute the enemies of his Imperium, the Khan would continue to hunt the Dark Eldar with his now chapter of White Scars veterans. Commanding his successor chapters to continue to wage the Yasan campaign until not a single Xenos tainted its worlds, the Kargan would nonetheless be saddened at the removal of the trappings of his once proud Legion upon his sons. Succeeding in their continued destruction of the Drukhari, Jaghatai would confront the Archon of the Dark Eldar on the world of Khorrasil 5. With the aid of the Destroyers, Rampagers, and Stormlords chapters, the Khan and his White Scars would corner the Archon. The Archon would retreat into the Webway, with Jaghatai Khan and his First Brotherhood charging into the rapidly closing portal. His deeds thereafter unknown, the White Scars believe that one day the Kargan will return to Chogoris and lead his chapter once more. Until then, it is believed that he still fights to this day, his free spirit untethered from all responsibilities but hunting his enemies. Initially recruiting the Astartes of the Legion from the training centers of Holy Terra, should they be deemed worthy, their training would continue on the moon of Luna. Implanted with the gene seed of the 5th Legion, the Astartes would be inducted into the then Star Hunters. With the discovery of their Primarch, Jaghatai, the Legion would, upon their renaming as the White Scars, diversify their training of initiates to the ocean world of KO-9, gas giant of Revelat Tyrades, and battleship Vormal. For those exceptionally promising candidates, their training would be mentored by Astartes instructors of Chogoris. Exceptionally supportive of their initiates, the Chogorans, unlike many legions such as the Lunar Wolves, would praise their candidates to what some would believe to be an excessive degree. Taught Korchin, the dialect of Chogoris, the difficult dialect would further test the initiate's mental acuity. With the ending of the Horus Heresy and beyond, the White Scars would recruit solely from Chogoris. The homeworld of the White Scars permits the warring of each of the planet's tribes, enabling the strongest of those born through battle to be chosen as neophytes of the chapter. With their bloodlines strengthened through toil, each nomadic tribe shall be visited by the giant warriors of the mountain fortress of Quan Zhao to induct their mightiest warriors into the chapter. Observing the battles between the tribes, the Scars, though distant from the planet's tribal communities, remain entrenched as legends amongst their peoples. Those whom are judged as worthy shall be taken by the grim warriors clad in white, red and gold to the fortress monastery, never to be seen again by their families, for they shall now ascend to become an angel of his Imperium. Imbued with gene seed and the ferocity of his homeworld, these White Scars shall continue their chapter's legacy of honor. Venerating the Emperor and their Primarch above all, whilst not acknowledging the Emperor as a god, the White Scars do believe that he is the ultimate uniter of mankind. To that end, the Fifth do not require a stringent fervour to the ecclesiarchy, whilst nonetheless utilising chaplains within their ranks. The symbol of their chapter, the lightning bolt, representing both the scars on their faces and the speed to which they strike down their foes. Heeding the teachings of their Stormseers, the White Scars revere the elements of air, land, and animalistic power of the elements. Their death said to free their souls to embark within the afterlife to travel the plains of the Neverworld. Taught to study the so-called noble pursuits by their Primarch, the White Scars devote much of their time outside of battle, perfecting the arts of hunting, calligraphy, and retelling of their chapter's glories. Held as replacement for the Imperial truth, the noble pursuits would hone the White Scars' mental well-being, whilst keeping their connection to Jagoris strong. Derided by Primarchs such as Rabute Guilliman and Lorgar Aurelian with its inception, these pursuits nonetheless prove valuable in enabling the White Scars to flourish. In battle, the White Scars are encouraged to laugh while slaying their foes, not out of a sense of enjoyment of slaughter, but rather to battle with unrestrained martial prowess and enjoyment of their skill at arms. A highly courteous legion, and thus chapter to outsiders of their number, the White Scars value honesty in their dealings with army regiments outside of the chapter. Adherents to the Librarius, the White Scars revere the power and authority of their so-called Stormseers. Jagatai Khan would aid in the drafting of the protocols of the Librarius, and as such, the White Scars would be a staunch force for the benefits of Psykers during the Council of Nicaea. Yet the Stormseers of the Legion would value restraint of their powers, rather than delving too deep into the machinations of the Warp. Understanding the Warp's corrupting influence, the White Scars revere its potency in battle, yet remain wary of its influence. Their discipline of wielding the Warp known as the Test of Heaven, the White Scars more than any Legion understand the potential danger the Warp poses. Believing the Warp not to be inherently evil, Stormseers such as Tagutai Yusugai would argue that its use must be respected, and those adept in its use must be rigorously trained to harness and control it. Yet any dealings with entities within the Warp should be indiscriminately avoided to prevent corruption with those who dabble with such beings. For each new member of the chapter, they shall relinquish their loyalty to their tribe and replace such fervour for that of the Emperor and the legacy of their chapter. Now a member of a 100 Astartes-strong brotherhood, they shall be commanded by their Khan, who in turn shall serve the orders of the chapter's great Khan. For even during their days as a legion, the White Scars deferred the use of the Imperium standard ranking organization and terminologies and replaced them with their own trappings and customs. Brotherhoods during the days of the Great Crusade and Horus Heresy would be far larger and be designated varying titles. Brotherhoods such as the Brotherhood of the Storm, Brotherhood of the Moon, and Brotherhood of Summer Lightning comprised of vast variances in heritage. Initially drawn from their original pioneer companies, many brotherhoods would be referred as brotherhoods by their Jagoran brethren, even should its members refer to themselves as a company. At its peak, the White Scars would encompass over 95,000 Astartes prior to the Horus Heresy. Due to such numbers, the brotherhoods of the chapter would be further compiled into hordes of different sizes. Their number would vary from 5,000 to 20,000 strong. Commanded by their Noyan Khans, the hordes of the White Scars would not be renewed with the application of the Codex Astartes and its diminishment to the role of chapter. The White Scars during the era Indomitus would still employ brotherhoods, but only 10 in number, at a much diminished size to their former glory. Fielding a preponderance of assault bikes and fast-moving vehicles, the White Scars differ from most chapters of the Adeptus Astartes in their overwhelming deployment of vehicles compared to their cousin chapters. Utilizing their Stormseers to divine subtle warp manipulations, such as weather alterations of fog and wind, to impede their opponents and obscure their forces, The White Scars, when deployed in battle, utilize a varied arrangement of strategies to bolster their lightning-fast attacks. Though ill-suited to the tactics of the White Scars, the chapter on rare occasions does deploy destroyer squads and heavy weaponry, yet prefers to keep such units in reserve for only the most unavoidable of deployments. Referred to during the days of the Legion as the Dark Sons of Death, or Karoglanlar, these seemingly deranged omens of ill fortune would be dispatched by the Stormseer Council for only the most dire of battles. A highly decentralized force, the White Scars, alike to the Alpha Legion, exercise high amounts of self-reliance without the authority of command figures. Khans employ the use of Kavkhans as their first officers, though the title is not officially ratified within their ranks. With their legacies inherited as a legion, informing their transition into a Codex-compliant chapter, the White Scars would form into their new organizational structure with little difficulty. A predominantly Codex-compliant chapter, the White Scars do however eschew the Tome's guidelines for battle, preferring their tried-and-true fast-moving mechanized and airborne tactics. Formed of 10 companies known as Brotherhoods, each company is led by a Khan. The first Brotherhood, known as the Spear Point Brotherhood, is formed of the chapter's veterans. A devastating force armed with the finest weapons and armor, the First Brotherhood are often dispatched to various strike forces to further bolster their effectiveness. The second to fifth Brotherhoods, known as the Firefist, Eagle, Tulwar, and Stormwrath Brotherhoods, act as the chapter's battle companies. At the forefront of each White Scars offensive, the battle companies utilize the mobility of their assault bikes to great effect. Rarely deployed en masse, a single Brotherhood is often more than sufficient in laying waste to any enemy foolish enough to test the speed of such a vast company. The 6th to 9th companies, the Hawkeye, Painstalker, Bloodrider, and Stormbolt Brotherhoods act as the reserve companies. Reinforcing the battle companies as needed, the reserve companies are required to be in close proximity to deployment due to the complication to travel incurred by the warp storms across the galaxy. Quickly able to reinforce failing lines of battle, the reserve companies respond with haste to support any engagement wherein the tide of battle begins to turn for the worse. Each reserve company harbors vehicle support necessary for any engagement. The 6th Hawkeye Brotherhood trains a small crew of Predator and Repulsor tanks for the rare occasions they are needed. The 7th Painstalker Brotherhood maintain a small reserve of land speeders with highly trained pilots. The 8th Bloodrider Brotherhood excel in close combat engagements, and should they excel, are often reassigned to the battle companies as needed. The 9th Stormbolt Brotherhood encompasses Eliminator and Hellblaster squads to aid in their heavy firepower requirements. And finally, the 10th Windspeaker Brotherhood maintains the neophytes of the chapter. Proven worthy in battle, the neophytes of the chapter are molded by the crucible of battle to ensure their proficiency. Specializing in stealth attacks, the neophytes are tutored by the Master of Recruits and mentored closely by the Brotherhood sergeants. The power armor of the White Scars is one of the most ornate of all the Legiones and Adeptus Astartes. Trimmed with red and embellished with gold ornamentation, the gleaming white armor of the 5th draws inspiration from the tribes of Chagoris in their use of iconography and ornamentation. Their squad and company are marked on their knee or greaves, rather than the Codex Astartes outline of the shoulder guard. Due to each Brotherhood containing 10 squads, the White Scars normally identify their squad placement on their left knee plate. Each squad sergeant displays a red lightning bolt design upon his right leg armor of varying designs. Assault bike squads adorn their helmets with tribal markings, though non-bike Astartes paint their helmets to denote rank. Sergeants paint their helmets red, set with a skull in its center, whilst veterans eschew the skull adornment and add a crux symbol on their right shoulder guard. Veteran sergeants retain the red paint and skull on their helmets, yet add a white stripe in its center. Lieutenants of the White Scars invert this design by wearing white helmets with a skull stud and a red band across the brow. The Khans, meanwhile, wear white helmets with a skull stud and add a winged skull on their right pauldron. Squad specializations such as Battle Line, Close Support, Fire Support, or Veterans are indicated in red on the right shoulder guard, with their chapter iconography of the lightning bolt displayed with pride on their left shoulder guard. Yet members of the 10th Brotherhood of Scouts, by chapter law, cannot utilize the horizontal bar beneath the thunderbolt of the chapter icon until they ascend to the rank of full initiates of the chapter. The command of the White Scars employs a vast assortment of unique identifiers and specialists. The title of Kargan is reserved for the Primarch of the Legion, Jaghatai Khan. Noyan Khan is a rank used only during the years of the Legion, for each Noyan Khan would command Ordus, comprised of as many as 20 Brotherhood companies. The Great Khan serves as chapter master during the era Indomitus. The Great Khan is chosen by the Stormseers of the chapter by trials of mental, physical, and spiritual trials. Deciding the fate of the chapter during the Kurultai, or Gathering of Khans, the Great Khan alongside the chapter's chaplains oversee the actions of their many wars and engagements. Khans act as captains of the chapter, and each command a single brotherhood consisting of 100 Astartes. As the company masters of the chapter, the Khans are also deemed worthy by the Stormseers. The Master of the Hunt is an honorific first given to the Lord of Summer Lightning, Jubal Khan, during the Horus Heresy. The Khan known as the Master of the Hunt tracks down and kills the enemy of his chapter, whom have been engaged in combat and escaped the chapter's justice. Each nemesis is written in the Scroll of Vengeance, and when they are slain, their severed head is brought to the fortress monastery of Quan Zhao within Chagoris. Their heads embalmed with silver by the High Chaplain of the chapter, the heads of the slain enemies of the White Scars line the path to their fortress monastery. Armed with the chapter relic, Moondraken and Moonfang, the Master of the Hunt slays some of the single most terrible and deadly foes of his Imperium. The Keshig act as the honor guard and advisors of the Great Khan. An elite cadre of Terminator armor-clad Astartes, the Keshig are among the most skilled veterans of the chapter and lay waste to any whom seek to harm their Great Khan or stand in their path. For those of great skill, but in breach of the chapter's storied code of honor, they shall be clad in black ceramite and be known as the Ebon Keshig. Shields for their most vulnerable battle brothers, the Ebon Keshig are deployed into the most deadly of engagements and shall be redeemed only should they survive their engagement. The Stormseers of the chapter act as the librarians of the White Scars. Known as Zadien Aga, Psykers of the chapter are enshrined in mystical traditions first introduced into the Legion by Jaghatai Khan. Overseeing the promotion of both neophytes and Khans of the chapter, the Stormseers are among the most revered and respected members of the White Scars. For every 10 summers that pass over Chagoris, the Stormseers venture to the embattled tribes of the planet and draw recruits to be tested by the White Scars. Deciding in council the successor to each Great Khan, the Stormseers are integral to the continued structure and organization of the chapter. Believing that the Emperor will once again rise from his throne, the Stormseers prepare the White Scars for the return of their Primarch and the beginning of the next great crusade to unite humanity. The Emchi are the given names of the chapter's apothecaries, whom serve the medical needs and gene seed stores of the chapter. Their order within the chapter, Akoglanla, the apothecaries of the chapter preserve the legacy of Jaghatai and his gene line with reverence, and are deployed as individual aides to various brotherhoods as needed. The Tech Marines of the chapter, the Iron Khans, oversee the vast stores of speed bikes, vehicles, and dreadnoughts deployed by the Legion. The High Chaplain of the White Scars is known as the Voice of the Storm, and monitors the spiritual well-being of the chapter, and leads the Gathering of Khans as the voice of the chapter. Though a chapter devoted to the arts of lightning strike warfare, the use of dreadnoughts is sparse among the White Scars. Imprisoned within their coffins, these Uhan Solban, translated as Guardians of the Morning and Evening Stars, the White Scars see the souls of such Astartes to be trapped within the dreadnought chassis. A fate worse than death for all White Scars, such units rarely see combat and are instead primarily used to guard the chapter's gene seed stores, both on Chagoris and Holy Terror, in order to preserve the legacy of those more fortunate than their guardians. Accepting their duty with solemn grace, the Uhan Solban rarely demand to fight the enemies of their chapter, and only when the tide of battle is dire and likely to end their vigil. And for those who err in their duty to uphold the chapter's honor, they shall be branded as Sagya Mazan. Exiled from the chapter, these penitent warriors must seek honor in death to absolve themselves of the failures and sins made in the name of their chapter.
My sons, it is more than 70 years since we cast the traitors from the walls of the Imperial Palace and began the restoration of our homeworld. We stand on the brink of victory, one that every sacrifice has counted towards. Today, we cleanse the galaxy of those who crossed our boundaries, violated our homes, and took our people. They will be crushed beneath our treads, disemboweled by our blades, and left shattered by our guns. I will give their heads on spikes, lining the roads of Chagoris. I will see their foul structures torn to the ground and turned to dust. Of their leader, I shall inflict 100-fold the pain it has caused my people. My sons, you shall each do the same.
The Destroyers are a second founding successor chapter of the White Scars. Present during the Battle of Coruscant V, among the first battles waged by the Destroyers, the chapter's forebears witnessed the last battle fought with their Genesire before his disappearance into the Webway. Characterized by their aggressive fighting style, drawing on their lineage of the Great Khan, despite their vaunted service during the 13th Black Crusade of Abaddon the Despoiler and War of Beasts, their methods in war have drawn scrutiny by the wider Imperium. Clad in black ceramite, adorned with sunburst yellow pauldrons, helmets and Aquila insignias, the Astartes indicate their tactical designation on their right pauldron with yellow paint. Adopting the conventions of the Codex Astartes, unlike many of the successors of the 5th Legion, the Destroyers assign their squad numeral in Low Gothic on their tactical symbol and mark their company on their left knee plate with the outlined Codex-compliant color scheme. The symbol of their chapter, a black skull surrounded by 4 lightning bolts on a field of sunburst yellow, epitomizes their affinity for lightning strikes. Their gene seed rumored to be unstable due to their savage nature, the chapter cares little for the opinions of outsiders and seeks only to embark upon their next mission.
The Marauders are a second founding successor chapter of the White Scars. Isolationist and wary of outsiders, despite their aloof nature, the Marauders never refuse to aid Imperial forces across the Void and trade only the minimal amount of intel to enable joint cooperation. Renowned for their skill as marksmen and snipers, the Marauders combine such prowess with ambushes, unleashing overwhelming force of arms. Venerated for their actions during the relief of Ferak's Hive, Dayata Purge, and Orphean War, on several occasions, the chapter have aided their primogenitor in battle and proven fitting in their complementary strategies. Clad in yellow ceramite, adorned with black chest aquillas and tactical markings on their right pauldrons, the chapter utilizes white High Gothic numerals on the center of such designs to indicate their squad, and black High Gothic numerals on their left knee plates to identify their companies. The symbol of their chapter, a black sword wreathed in red flames on a field of yellow, epitomizes their martial skill and duty to purge the wicked. Siring the infamous Mantis Warriors chapter, the deeds conducted by their descendants during the Badab War, though infamous, nonetheless exemplify their genetic line's skill in combat. For to face the Marauders in battle is to incur the unrestrained wrath of the Warhawk's fury. The Rampagers are a second founding successor chapter of the White Scars. Honoring the sacred traditions of their primogenitor legion, the Rampagers ritually scar their flesh to denote their rank and battle honors. Derived from the ancient blooding of the 5th Legion, which united their kinsmen in purpose, the drawn blood from such rituals is mixed with the drinks of all present in the subsequent ceremonies
honoring their achievements. Recruiting new aspirants to their chapter from conquered feral worlds, only those deemed exempt from both physical mutations and spiritual corruption are accepted. Present during the Dabble Nar Free campaign, Abaddon the Despoiler's 7th Black Crusade, and Slaughter at Macan, their efforts to aid their allies on numerous campaigns have not gone unnoticed by the Adeptus Astartes. Clad in red ceramite, centered by black aquillas on their chest, their tactical role is designated on their right greave in black paint, with likewise colored High Gothic numerals on their shoulder guards identifying their squad number. Nominally adhering to the conventions of the Codex Astartes, the chapter paints their right knee guard in the prescribed Codex-compliant company color scheme. The symbol of their chapter, a yellow lightning bolt grasped by a white hand on a field of red, derived from their Legion of Origin, exemplifies their readiness to unleash their wrath upon their foes. Upholding the legacy of the Warhawk, the Rampagers continue to combat the enemies of the Imperium with unrelenting force.
There is no greater glory than being the first warrior to spill the foe's blood. The Stormlords are a second founding successor chapter of the White Scars. Founded in the wake of the Great Civil War of the Horus Heresy, with time, a rivalry between the chapter and its primogenitor would grow. Competing to surpass the glories of the White Scars when taking to the field of battle, their service to the Emperor has been lauded far and wide by the Imperium. Experts at hunting orc wars perpetrated by the Greenskin hordes, their feasting halls are lined with the claimed scalps of slain orcs. Honored for their service during the War of the Beast, Death of the Witching Moon, retaking of Rin's World, and Third War for Armageddon, their drawing of first blood when facing the orcs of Warboss Death Drekker wounded the pride of the warriors of Chogoris. Clad in halved heraldry of white and red paint, their backpacks and chest aquillas are adorned with black. Identifying their tactical role with white paint on their right pauldrons, the chapter eschews the traditions of the White Scars by applying black low-Gothic numerals on their tactical designs, centered on or to either side in white paint to mark their squad. Complying with the outlines of the Codex Astartes with only slight deviation, the chapter paints their helmets varying colors to identify their company rather than their pauldrons, with veterans adding a laurel icon to their crown. The symbol of their chapter, a white skull superimposed by 3 red lightning bolts on a field of white, honors the tribal markings of Chogoris first used by their forebears of the 5th Legion. Championing the use of lightning strike warfare, characterized by the use of assault bikes and land speeders, the chapter adheres to the legacy of the Warhawk, much alike to their founding legion, and never relents in their persecution of the wicked.
I see you standing here around me, my brothers, and I see also the bitterness of our last battles in your eyes. We have walked long together in the shadows, you and I, and we are so few now. But our bright father has not found us wanting. We who remain of this brotherhood, who stand here on this dark and empty world, it is for us to remember all that has gone before, to pass it down to those who shall come after us, to build upon the honor of those memories. Brothers, we are but shadows in the darkness, yet we carry the trust and faith of all mankind upon our shoulders. That trust will never be misplaced. That faith shall never be broken. We will endure, and in all things, we will be faithful to He who made us. That is our burden and our privilege. We are the hunters in the dark, and we shall never be defeated.
The Dark Hunters are a successor chapter of the White Scars. Founded during the 37th millennium, following their combating of the heretic tech priests of the Ecclusiad War, the service made by Captain Angar of the White Scars proved worthy of great reward. Alongside the 98 Astartes of his company, Angar accepted the gift of an ancient relic power axe from his former Great Khan before embarking as the first chapter master of the Dark Hunters. Said to have once been wielded by the Warhawk himself millennia prior, this double-headed weapon wreathed in blue flame became known to this young chapter as the Axe of Justice. Adopting the axe as their chapter symbol and painting their armor dark blue to mimic the hue of its flames, for millennia, the Dark Hunters have upheld the legacy of the Kargan with grim determination. Favoring stealth maneuvers over the methods of war characterized by their primogenitor, it is rumored that their forebears prior to cooperation with the Sons of the Liberator, the Raven Guard, had influenced their combat doctrine. Their first campaign, the Battle of Bloodsteel, fought against the demon engines of Warpsmith Hilgar. The chapter's losses, incurred from the grueling battle against demon engines and the warlord titan, Repellus Maximal, has ingrained a deep-seated hatred for the use of machinery and even fostered animosity with the Mechanicus of Mars. Purging these fusions of machine heresy whenever possible, the Dark Hunters have become near obsessed with cleansing the void of such abominations. Harried by the forces of the renegade Adeptus Mechanicus Princeps, known as the Blind King, defending their lightless homeworld of Phobian during 936.M38, despite losing over 400 battle brothers during the fray, the sacrifices of those lost are remembered to this day when uttering the phrase Umbra Sumus, we are shadows. Currently appointed to combat the conglomerate Slaanesh warband known as the Punishers, the Dark Hunters have staved off their nemesis during the First and Second Punisher Wars. Their homeworld besieged once more by 250,000 Chaos Cultists during the First Punisher War. Within their fortress monastery of Mors Angnar, the Dark Hunters defended their holdfast until reinforcements of the Brazen Fists, Dark Suns, Doomslayers, and Shadowhawks came to their aid, rebuilding their ravaged numbers once more before taking the fight to the Punishers on the world of Ras Hunnam. Their temporary alliance with the Eldar Asuryani of Craftworld Kalor allowed for victory at the cost of Captain Jonah of the chapter being taken into inquisitorial custody charged with an act of heresy. Clad in navy blue ceramite, adorned with white chest aquillas, the chapter also uses white tactical markings on their right pauldron and right knee plate. Designating their squad number with black High Gothic numerals centered on the designs of their tactical role. As a Codex-compliant chapter, the Dark Hunters trim their pauldrons to denote their company with the prescribed Codex-outlined color scheme. The symbol of their chapter, a white double-bladed axe on a field of blue, symbolizes the legendary Axe of Justice first entrusted to the chapter. Resolute in their duty to fell tech heresies and the disciples of the ruinous powers, the Dark Hunters continue to stalk the shadows until ready to strike. The Mantis Warriors are a successor chapter of the White Scars. Founded during the mid-34th millennium as part of the 8th founding of Astartes, these descendants of the Warhawk would be charged with patrolling the threats of the gargantuan warp storm of the Segmentum Obscurus, known as the Eye of Terror. Renowned as cunning warriors through their deeds, these experts of guerrilla warfare, ambushes, and sudden assaults belie their solitary vigil with no expectation of aid. Destroying several traitor Astartes warbands and Xenos raiders throughout their tenure. With time, the chapter began to operate most regularly within the Endymion cluster of the Galactic East. Inducted into the initiative created by the High Lords of Terror, known as the Maelstrom Warders, during 587.M41, alongside the chapters of the Charnel Guard, Lamenters, and Astral Claws, the Mantis Warriors guarded the Imperium from piratical raids and chaos incursions. Led by the Master of the Astral Claws, Luft Huron, The Maelstrom Warders purged the wicked from the feral and feudal worlds of the Endymion cluster, until dissent began to grow within their ranks. With the Charnel Guard's reassignment to the Thanatos Crusade during 651.M41, the understrength Maelstrom Warders petitioned the High Lords of Terror for increased supplies and reinforcement in order to contain the threats from the Warp Storm. Denying the calls for assistance, the ruling body of the Imperium continued to diminish the effectiveness of this band of Astartes, leading to the continual decline of their leader's sanity. Envisioning a great purge of the Maelstrom with dozens of Space Marines at his side, Luft Huron began to amass weapons and supplies to fuel his crusade. Refusing to give tithes to the Imperium and demanding the peoples of the Badab sector to increase production of war materials, the Astral Claws declared independence from the Imperium alongside the Mantis Warriors and stalwart Oathsworn allies of the Executioners chapter. Seeing their intentions as righteous as the Emperor's sworn guardians of the Maelstrom, the Mantis Warriors remained ignorant of the master of the Astral Claw's slow descent into the clutches of chaos. Attacking the Firehawks chapter Voidcraft, Red Harbinger, during 904.M41, the Mantis Warriors commit the first great act of violence against the loyalists of the Imperium. Waging civil war against the amassed strength of 12 Loyalist Space Marine chapters, the Renegades of Badab fought a doomed 12-year campaign. Surrendering during the Tranquility Campaign of 910.M41, the combined might of the Red Scorpions and newly arrived Carcharodon's chapter harried the remaining survivors of the Mantis Warriors to the point of near extinction. Judged guilty of conspiring with the Astral Claws following Luft Huron's inevitable retreat into the Maelstrom, the Mantis Warriors would undergo a 100-year penitent crusade as a means to atone for their sins. The corrupting influence of chaos showed no signs of tainting the chapter, yet their misplaced loyalty had proven to be their downfall, and for the next century, they would receive no aid nor reinforcement as they fought to redeem their honor. Stripped of their guardianship of the Endymion cluster, their recruitment world of Tranquility II, and homeworld of Ufisa, aspirants and resources from such fiefdoms would be entrusted to the Firehawks and Carcharodons, which had incurred losses fighting the Mantis Warriors. Losing much of their remaining strength over the next century of war, the chapter absolved themselves of shame during the final battle of their penitent crusade against the Tyranids upon the world of Herodian IV. Recruiting aspirants once more with the blessing of the Emperor's Holy Inquisition, despite the resurgence of the Avenging Sun and Grey Shield Astartes of the Indomitus Crusade, the Mantis Warriors had not yet proven worthy of direct intervention. Permitted to create their own Primaris Space Marines, gifted by the Torchbearer fleet of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the chapter slowly integrates these superior Astartes into the fold, through the arduous process of transforming their firstborn through surgeries and organ implantation. Seconding several Astartes to the elite branch of the Ordo Xenos' Chamber Militant prior to the Badab War, following their betrayal, the Death Watch no longer willingly accept such Astartes into the fold of their ranks. Teetering on the edge of extinction to this day, the Mantis Warriors, regardless of their plight, find solace that should they perish, their legacy shall be honored within the Hallway of Heroes, which catalogues and honors every fallen chapter who died fighting in the name of the Emperor. Closely adhering to the tenets of the Codex Astartes, peculiarly for a successor of the 5th Legion, the Mantis Warriors have inherited little trappings and adornments from their primogenitor chapter. Under strength for many centuries, the chapter has not fielded their companies in full strength in many years, and deploys only minimal armored vehicles in the form of their preciously maintained Predator and Land Raider tanks. Leaning heavily into their mastery of hit-and-run tactics in order to prevent further casualties to further diminish their numbers, the chapter is careful to deploy the remaining fleet of attack craft, such as Thunderhawks, whilst extinction of their creed looms on the horizon. Forming specialized fighting units known as Praying Mantidae, each is tasked with hunting down the remaining survivors of the once Astral Claws chapter. Trained as the elite of the chapter, and marked with snake-like tattoos which cover their bodies, should any incursion of the Red Corsairs present themselves, the Mantis warriors are all too willing to seek vengeance against their former allies. Veterans of the Tranquility campaign of the Badab War form sniper squads, renowned for their marksmanship. Their strange camouflage designs a mark of distinction within their creed. Inheriting the ferocity of their Primarch, honed through the most dangerous of campaigns, the savagery of the Mantis warriors is allayed by the cryptic teachings of their librarians and shameful past. The flaw of their Priomnor implant influencing each Astartes of the chapter's emotional state, each warrior regularly experiences overwhelming feelings of shame, which accelerates their admiration of the Emperor and need to achieve forgiveness. Improving their physical strength when experiencing such emotions, the neurotoxins released by their Priomnor also increases the librarians of the chapter's reaction speed to near precognitive levels, blinding their focus to only concern themselves with threats to the Imperium. As their gene flaw progresses, many Astartes can be struck down by lack of awareness of their surroundings as they imbibe themselves with zeal, known by their ranks as battle haze. Organizing such warriors into squads known as Mantis Religiosia, these battle brothers charge into the fray with no regard for their own safety or that of their peers. Aloof and autonomous in nature, their exile has estranged the chapter further from their peers and increased levels of individuality and self-reliance. Uninterested with their reputation in the eyes of the wider Imperium, the Mantis warriors care only for their standing with the master of mankind. Passing their weapons and armor down from generation to generation, the Mantis warriors revere the craftsmanship of each warrior whose armaments they inherit, and add their own embellishments to their surface with continued service. Carving warding prayers, kill markings, and personal heraldic insignias on their armor, each suit of ceramite continues the legacy and deeds of each of its former bearers. Clad in green ceramite, adorned with yellow pauldrons and faceplates, the chapter utilizes black tactical markings on their right pauldrons, centered with red logothic numerals to signify their company, indicating their squad number with white logothic numerals on their left knee plate. The symbol of their chapter, a red-eyed black mantis head on a field of yellow, epitomizes their skill for hunting the enemies of the Imperium. Orphaned and with no true allies within the Imperium, the disgrace of the chapter haunts the Mantis warriors to this day, with little hope of escaping their fate as a doomed chapter. The Iron Talons are a successor chapter of the White Scars. Assigned as a member of the band of 20 Astartes chapters of the Mythos Angelica Mortis, or Astartes Praesus, charged with patrolling the borders of the Eye of Terror, the Iron Talons have stood vigilant for signs of chaos incursion for millennia. Noted for their savage nature in battle and proclivity to drape the flayed skin of their enemies on their armor, many foes of the Imperium quake with fear at the mere sight of these macabre warriors. Clad in black ceramite, adorned with silver arms, gauntlets, and chest aquillas, each Astartes of their chapter indicates their tactical role with yellow paint on their right pauldrons, their squad designation marked with black high Gothic numerals on the center of such designs. The symbol of their chapter, a metallic silver talon on a black roundlet, signifies their near primal depredation of their enemies. Barbaric in nature, and bordering on the heretical with their methods used, woe betide any of the enemies of the Imperium who become victim to the blades of these morbid souls. The Solar Hawks are a successor chapter of the White Scars. Sire during the 35th millennium from an unknown founding, their aggressive fighting style and honorable demeanor belies their heritage as sons of the Warhawk. Masters of airborne assault, favoring the deployment of Storm Talons, Storm Ravens, and other similar vehicles, the chapter is famed for their librarians, which are often selected to join the Death Watch alongside librarians of the venerated Blood Angels and Blood Ravens. Earning great renown during the Black Fist scalping of 882.M41, fighting alongside their brethren of the White Scars and Stormlords,
the competitive nature of Jagatai's sons fueled their fervor for battle against the Greenskins. Clad in sunburst yellow ceramite, adorned with golden chest aquillas, whilst also painting the entirety of their left arm and its pauldron with white to honor their primogenitor. Indicating their tactical role with red paint on their right pauldron, the chapter marks their squad designation with high Gothic numerals on the center of such designs, changing the color of such numerals to indicate their company using the conventions of the Codex Astartes. The symbol of their chapter, a black hooded red hawk's head on a field of white, epitomizes their nature as free-spirited hunters. Committing 3 demi-companies to aid the White Scars on the world of Vigilus, their valor during the War of Beasts has earned them the respect and praise of their vaunted kinsmen.
The Storm Reapers are an Ultima founding successor chapter of the White Scars. As the first of the Primaris chapters derived from the lineage of the Warhawk of Jagoris, these warriors imbued with the blood of the Kargan are among the most fervent of their creed. Characteristically noble and wise, as is the typical demeanor of the progeny of Jagatai Khan, their service during the Absolutist Crusade exemplified their ferocity in battle. Further gloried for their combat during the Brimstone Stampede, fighting alongside the Grey Knights chapter against the Thralls of Khorne, the chapter also fought during the War of Beasts, stationed on the world of Vigilus. Clad in white ceramite, adorned with black chest aquillas and backpacks, the chapter derived their heraldic designs from the Jagun tribe of their homeworld. Echoing the lightning bolt motifs of their primogenitor with black paint, the chapter uses such designs on their left knee plate or greaves to identify their company. Marking their tactical role on their right pauldron with black paint, each Astartes stencils white Higothic numerals on their design to identify their squad. The symbol of their chapter, a black double-bladed battle axe flanked by red lightning bolts on a field of white, epitomizes their martial skill and reverence for their forebears. Standing proud as the foremost Primaris sons of their gene-sire, the Storm Reapers continue to carve their Primarch's legacy across the stars with the edge of their blades. This has been a tale of the Great Imperium of Man, read by the Remembrancer. The sons of the Warhawk never falter in their willingness to charge into the fray. Derided as barbaric by their peers and misunderstood by many, the warrior creed of the Kargan cares not for the opinions of those who take no heed for their culture nor legacy. Be wary of those who would besmirch your own demeanor, for they are ignorant of the experiences which have culminated in your character. Instead, find resolve in your own innate qualities, which do not need to be heralded to be justified, safe in the knowledge that your own actions have purpose.